Go ahead, the billionaire said with a cold smile that echoed across the ballroom. If you insist on speaking French, then impress everyone. The laughter arrived before the silence did. It rolled through the magnificent ballroom of the Grand Lakeside Hotel like a carefully rehearsed performance, bouncing beneath glittering crystal chandeliers and across tables decorated with white roses and polished silver. Hundreds of influential guests had gathered for one of Chicago's most prestigious children's charity galas. Investors, philanthropists, diplomats, journalists, and corporate executives filled the room with expensive conversations and effortless confidence. At the center of it all stood William Carter, a 52-year-old billionaire chief executive officer whose reputation for building billion-dollar companies was matched only by his belief that he could read people within seconds. To him, appearances rarely lied. Across the room, Naomi Brooks balanced a silver serving tray with practiced grace. At 29 years old, she had worked at the hotel long enough to know exactly how invisible a waitress could become in a room filled with powerful people. Her black apron was perfectly pressed, her posture professional, and her smile genuine without ever appearing forced. She moved quietly from table to table, refilling glasses, clearing plates, and making sure every guest felt welcome. Most people barely noticed her. She preferred it that way. William smiled politely at the French guest before turning his attention toward Naomi. Interesting, he said loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. I didn't realize our serving staff came with international language lessons. A few guests chuckled. Naomi remained composed. I was only trying to make our guest feel comfortable, sir, she answered calmly. William folded his arms. Well, comfort is one thing. Showing off is another. More people stopped talking and looked in their direction. Camera flashes from journalists covering the charity event occasionally illuminated the room. Even the musicians quietly lowered the volume of their performance. Naomi never broke eye contact, yet there was no challenge in her expression, only quiet confidence. William interpreted her calm as hesitation. Tell me something, he continued with a confident grin. Can you actually speak French? Or did you memorize a few polite phrases to impress wealthy visitors? The question was sharp enough to make several guests exchange uncomfortable glances. Naomi answered softly, I speak enough to have a conversation. William laughed lightly, inviting everyone else to join him. Enough, he repeated. That sounds convenient. He slowly turned toward the audience gathering around them. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, raising his glass with theatrical confidence. Our waitress seems to have hidden talents. Why don't we give her an opportunity to demonstrate them? Curious whispers spread across the ballroom. Some people smiled, expecting harmless entertainment. Others looked uneasy, sensing that the moment had crossed an invisible line. Naomi stood perfectly still, her hands resting gently around the serving tray. She neither defended herself nor apologized. William looked directly at her and spoke the sentence that would change the entire evening. Go ahead, he said. Speak French. Naomi looked directly at William Carter before gently placing the silver serving tray onto a nearby service station with slow, deliberate movements that seemed almost effortless. Without a trace of hesitation, she turned toward the elderly gentleman from Paris and began speaking elegant, fluent French with natural rhythm and warm expression. Her pronunciation was crisp, her vocabulary sophisticated, and her confidence unmistakable. The gentleman's eyes widened before his face softened into a delighted smile. He answered with several longer sentences, speaking quickly as though testing whether she truly understood. Naomi listened carefully, nodded, and responded immediately with thoughtful observations that caused the gentleman to laugh with genuine appreciation. Several guests who understood French exchanged surprised glances. This was no collection of memorized phrases. It was effortless conversation. William maintained his confident smile, although the certainty behind it had begun to fade. Before anyone could react further, a distinguished guest wearing a dark navy suit stepped forward from another table. He introduced himself in German and politely asked Naomi whether she might also understand his language. Naomi turned toward him without the slightest pause. Her reply came in smooth, fluent German, delivered with the same calm confidence she had shown only moments earlier. The gentleman blinked twice before smiling broadly and continuing the conversation. Their exchange grew more animated, drawing even more attention from the crowd gathering around them. The laughter that had filled the ballroom only moments earlier completely disappeared. Guests quietly leaned closer, trying to understand what was happening. Journalists instinctively lifted their cameras. Hotel employees paused their work. Even William noticed that every pair of eyes had shifted away from him and toward the young waitress standing beneath the crystal lights. He folded his arms more tightly, refusing to show uncertainty. Then another voice joined the growing circle. A businesswoman visiting from Tokyo stepped forward with, "Instead," Naomi answered in clear, graceful Japanese with such natural cadence that the woman's expression transformed from curiosity into complete astonishment. Their conversation continued for nearly a minute before both women bowed respectfully to one another. Audible gasps spread across the ballroom. Someone quietly whispered, "That cannot be possible." William no longer looked amused. He studied Naomi with the careful attention of someone reevaluating everything he believed only minutes before. Before anyone had time to process what they had witnessed, another international guest smiled and greeted Naomi in Spanish. She answered immediately. A guest from Italy followed. She responded with equally fluent Italian. A Portuguese investor joined with a question in Portuguese. Naomi answered without searching for words. The room seemed to shrink around her as every new conversation replaced disbelief with admiration. Phones quietly appeared above the crowd as guests began recording the remarkable exchange. Nobody had planned this. Nobody could have imagined it. William glanced around the ballroom and realized that the event he had spent months organizing was no longer centered around billionaire investors or corporate announcements. Every conversation had stopped. Every camera pointed toward the woman he had challenged only minutes earlier. For the first time that evening, he understood that the audience was no longer waiting for him to speak. They were waiting to discover what Naomi Brooks would say next. The silence lingered for only a heartbeat before another guest stepped forward with an amused smile. He introduced himself as a business leader from Beijing and greeted Naomi in Mandarin, expecting at least a moment of hesitation after the remarkable series of conversations she had already completed. Instead, Naomi answered with calm precision, matching his pace and tone as naturally as if they had known each other for years. The gentleman laughed warmly, clearly impressed, and continued asking increasingly thoughtful questions about his recent travels through the United States. Naomi responded with cultural awareness, genuine curiosity, and effortless fluency that made the exchange feel personal rather than rehearsed. Several international guests quietly applauded. Before the applause could fade, a distinguished woman from Dubai smiled and addressed Naomi in Arabic. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath once again. Naomi acknowledged her with respectful courtesy before replying in elegant Arabic that immediately brought a surprised expression to the woman's face. Their conversation flowed with confidence and warmth, ending with grateful smiles that needed no translation. By now the crowd had grown so large that hotel staff carefully redirected guests to keep the walkways open. The charity gala had transformed into something no one could have predicted. People who had arrived expecting speeches about investments and philanthropy now witnessed a living reminder that extraordinary ability could appear where they least expected it. William Carter remained motionless. His confident posture had not changed, yet his expression revealed the first signs of genuine uncertainty. Only minutes earlier he had believed he was directing the evening. Now he realized he had become little more than another observer. Naomi had never raised her voice, never attempted to embarrass him, and never displayed even the smallest trace of pride. She simply answered every question with quiet professionalism, allowing her knowledge to speak more loudly than any defense ever could. The French gentleman gently turned toward William with a respectful smile. "Sir," he said in clear English, "your employee possesses an extraordinary gift." Others immediately agreed. Guests from Germany, Japan, Spain, Italy, Portugal, China, and the Middle East all expressed admiration, each describing how naturally Naomi had communicated in their own language. Several admitted they had intentionally used regional expressions or subtle cultural references that only someone with deep understanding would recognize. Naomi had answered every one without hesitation. Journalists quickly gathered near the front of the room, eager to capture reactions from international visitors. Camera flashes illuminated the ballroom as social media clips quietly began spreading beyond the hotel walls. William noticed executives checking their phones with expressions of disbelief as short videos of Naomi speaking multiple languages accumulated thousands of views within minutes. The attention that normally followed billionaire announcements was now focused entirely on a waitress wearing a simple black apron. Naomi remained remarkably composed throughout the growing excitement. She thanked each guest for their kindness before preparing to return to her duties, reaching for the serving tray she had carefully set aside. To her, the evening was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about treating every guest with dignity, regardless of where they came from or what language they spoke. William watched her in complete silence as she calmly resumed serving the nearest table. That ordinary gesture unsettled him more than all 8 languages combined. Anyone could celebrate a victory. Very few people could walk away from one without asking for recognition. For the first time in many years, William found himself wondering whether the most valuable person in the entire ballroom had been standing in front of him from the very beginning, hidden behind an apron that he had mistaken for a limitation. The gala finally returned to its carefully planned schedule, but the atmosphere had changed in a way that no event coordinator could have anticipated. Conversations about stock markets, international partnerships, and investment opportunities quietly gave way to discussions about the remarkable young waitress who had spoken with guests from around the world as though every language belonged to her. Naomi Brooks continued serving tables with the same steady professionalism she had shown since the beginning of the evening. She smiled politely, refilled glasses before anyone needed to ask, thanked guests for attending the charity event, and never once mentioned what had just happened. Her humility became almost as unforgettable as her extraordinary talent. Across the ballroom, William Carter found it increasingly difficult to focus on the conversations surrounding him. Investors continued asking questions about expansion plans, but his attention repeatedly drifted toward Naomi as she moved gracefully between tables. The confidence that had always guided his judgment suddenly felt less dependable than it had only an hour earlier. After the final guests departed and the ballroom slowly emptied, William remained behind instead of leaving with his executive team. Hotel employees folded linens, cleared decorations, and carefully stacked chairs while the soft glow of the chandeliers reflected across the polished marble floor. He quietly approached the hotel's general manager with a question that surprised even himself. "How long has Naomi Brooks worked here?" The manager smiled. "Almost 4 years." William nodded thoughtfully. Was she always interested in languages? The manager hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Carter, Naomi never talks much about herself, but everyone here knows she is one of the most educated people on our staff. She simply does not believe education makes someone more important than anyone else." That answer stayed with William as he drove home through the quiet streets of Chicago. Early the next morning, curiosity overcame pride. Instead of beginning his day with financial reports, he asked his executive assistant to gather publicly available information about Naomi Brooks. He expected to discover a language certificate or perhaps a semester studying abroad. What he found instead left him staring silently at his computer screen. Naomi had graduated at the top of her university program in linguistics with exceptional academic recognition. Her professors had described her as one of the most gifted language scholars they had ever taught. She had earned competitive international research opportunities and received invitations to advanced graduate programs. Every recommendation praised not only her remarkable ability to master languages, but also her unusual understanding of different cultures and the people who lived within them. Then the timeline changed. The awards stopped. The research ended. The academic publications disappeared. William continued reading until he reached a brief local newspaper article published several years earlier. It mentioned that Naomi had paused her academic career to become the primary caregiver for her mother during a prolonged illness. There was no dramatic headline, no request for sympathy, and no public campaign seeking recognition. She had quietly accepted full-time work at the Grand Lakeside Hotel to provide stability for her family, while putting aside opportunities that many scholars spend a lifetime hoping to receive. William leaned back in his chair and slowly removed his glasses. The image of Naomi standing calmly in her black apron returned to his mind. He realized he had never truly seen her that evening. He had seen only a uniform, a job title, and his own assumptions. The woman he had tried to embarrass had never needed to prove her intelligence because she had never measured her worth by the opinions of strangers. For the first time in many years, William understood that the greatest lesson of the gala had not been about 8 languages. It had been about the quiet strength of someone who carried extraordinary gifts without ever demanding the world notice them. The following afternoon, William Carter entered the executive conference room for what was expected to be the most important negotiation of the quarter. Representatives from 8 international companies had traveled to Chicago to finalize a strategic partnership that could shape the future of his corporation for years to come. The polished oak table reflected the morning sunlight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows while interpreters, legal advisors, and senior executives reviewed presentation materials one final time. Everything appeared perfectly organized until the discussion actually began. Within the first 30 minutes, subtle misunderstandings started slowing the conversation. Literal translations failed to capture cultural meaning. A harmless expression from one delegation sounded unusually direct to another. A joke that received polite laughter in one language created visible confusion in another. Every delay made the atmosphere increasingly tense, not because anyone intended conflict, but because genuine communication required much more than replacing one word with another. William watched valuable opportunities slowly disappear beneath layers of cautious clarification. During a brief recess, one of the visiting executives quietly approached him. It was the same French gentleman Naomi had spoken with during the charity gala. He smiled politely before offering a simple suggestion. If you truly want everyone in this room to understand one another, there is someone you already know who can help. William immediately knew who he meant. For a moment, pride urged him to dismiss the idea. Then he remembered everything he had learned the previous evening. 10 minutes later, a company vehicle arrived at the Grand Lakeside Hotel. Naomi had just finished helping prepare the lunch service when the hotel manager explained that William Carter wished to speak with her. She listened carefully without assuming anything. When she entered the conference room, conversations paused for a different reason than they had at the gala. This time, the room was not waiting for entertainment. It was waiting for hope. William stepped forward himself. His voice was noticeably quieter than before. "Miss Brooks," he said sincerely, "we are struggling to understand one another. Would you be willing to help us communicate?" Naomi looked around the room and noticed expressions filled not with arrogance, but with expectation. She smiled warmly. "I will be happy to help if everyone is comfortable working together." Within minutes, the atmosphere transformed. Naomi did far more than translate vocabulary. She explained cultural context before misunderstandings could grow. She recognized when humor should remain local, when business customs differed, and when a slight adjustment in wording could completely change the emotional tone of a conversation. She moved naturally from French to German, from Japanese to Spanish, from Italian to Portuguese, then to Mandarin and Arabic, allowing every delegation to feel fully respected without anyone being placed above another. Gradually, guarded expressions became genuine smiles. Questions that had taken 20 minutes to clarify were resolved in moments. Executives who had appeared hesitant now exchanged ideas freely because they no longer worried about being misunderstood. Even the legal advisors remarked that discussions were progressing more smoothly than they had anticipated. William remained unusually quiet throughout the afternoon, observing not only Naomi's remarkable command of language, but also her extraordinary ability to make every person in the room feel heard. By the time the final agreement was signed, The conference room felt less like a business negotiation and more like a gathering of trusted partners. As everyone stood to shake hands, several international executives thanked Naomi before thanking William. He accepted their gratitude with humility because he knew the truth. The partnership had not been saved by the largest company in the room or by the wealthiest executive at the table. It had been saved by a woman whose greatest gift was never simply speaking 8 languages. It was understanding the people behind every one of them. Several weeks later, the story that had quietly begun inside a hotel ballroom had spread far beyond Chicago. Business magazines praised the successful international partnership, but what fascinated people most was not the size of the agreement. It was the unexpected role played by a hotel waitress whose extraordinary ability had united people from different cultures when experienced professionals could not. William Carter read article after article, noticing that every interview eventually returned to the same lesson. True leadership was not measured by how many people followed orders. It was measured by how many people were seen, respected, and given the opportunity to contribute. That realization stayed with him until he decided there was one conversation he could no longer postpone. He returned to the Grand Lakeside Hotel without a media announcement, without executives, and without the confidence that had once accompanied every public appearance. Naomi Brooks was preparing tables for the evening dinner service when she noticed him approaching. She greeted him with the same calm professionalism she offered every guest. There was no resentment in her expression and no sign that she expected anything from him. William paused for a moment before speaking. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology that should have come much sooner." Naomi listened without interrupting. William continued, his voice sincere and steady. "The night of the charity gala, I judged your value by your uniform instead of your character. I assumed your position defined your ability. I was completely wrong." The words hung in the quiet dining room as nearby employees slowed their work, surprised to witness one of the country's most influential business leaders admitting his mistake without excuses. Naomi smiled gently. "Everyone makes assumptions sometimes," she replied. "The important part is what we choose to learn afterward." Her answer carried neither triumph nor criticism. It carried grace. William nodded with genuine gratitude before presenting an invitation. He explained that his company was creating a new global communication and cultural excellence initiative, designed to help employees understand not only different languages, but also the people and traditions behind them. He wanted Naomi to lead the program. She listened carefully before asking a single question. "Will every employee be welcome, regardless of job title?" William answered immediately. "Every employee, from the newest member of the maintenance team to the executive board." Naomi considered his response for a moment before extending her hand. "Then I would be honored to help." Their handshake marked the beginning of something much larger than a new position. Over the following months, Naomi designed workshops where receptionists learned alongside senior executives, managers partnered with hospitality staff, and international teams shared customs, traditions, and perspectives that had previously remained invisible inside corporate walls. Employees discovered that listening carefully often solved problems faster than speaking confidently. Departments that had struggled with communication began working together with new respect. The company's reputation changed as clients from around the world praised not only its business results, but also its culture of dignity and inclusion. 1 year after the unforgettable gala, William stood once again beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Lakeside Hotel during the annual charity celebration. This time, he walked to the podium and smiled at the audience before saying, "Last year I believed success was about being the smartest person in the room. Tonight, I know something better. The wisest people are often the ones we overlook first." He invited Naomi to join him on the stage. The applause began quietly before growing into a standing ovation that filled the ballroom. Naomi thanked the audience with warmth and humility before greeting them in 8 different languages, each one welcomed with joyful applause. William looked across the room and realized that the greatest investment he had ever made was not measured in dollars, buildings, or contracts. It began the moment he finally chose to see the extraordinary person standing behind an ordinary apron. In the months that followed, the transformation inside William Carter's company became impossible to ignore. What had begun as a single conversation after an uncomfortable evening evolved into a philosophy that quietly reshaped every office, meeting room, and training program throughout the organization. Naomi Brooks never introduced herself by listing the languages she spoke or the academic honors she had earned. Instead, she began every workshop with the same simple message. Every person wants to feel respected before they want to be understood. At first, many employees expected a traditional corporate seminar filled with presentation slides and technical terminology. Instead, Naomi invited people to sit together regardless of department or position. Receptionists shared tables with vice presidents. New employees worked alongside senior executives. Engineers listened to customer service representatives. Hospitality staff exchanged ideas with financial analysts. Every exercise encouraged participants to understand experiences beyond their own responsibilities. William attended every session, choosing a seat among everyone else rather than at the front of the room. He listened more than he spoke. The executives who had once followed his example of confidence gradually noticed that his greatest strength had become his willingness to learn publicly. During one workshop, Naomi asked everyone to introduce themselves without mentioning their job title. The room felt unusually quiet. Many realized they had spent years allowing business cards and office doors to define their identities. One by one, people began describing themselves as parents, volunteers, musicians, neighbors, teachers, immigrants, mentors, or lifelong learners. Laughter replaced formality as co-workers discovered unexpected similarities that had remained hidden despite working together for years. William smiled as he realized he had known quarterly reports better than many of the people sitting only a few feet away from him. The company culture slowly changed in ways that spreadsheets could never fully measure. International clients commented that meetings felt more welcoming. New employees reported feeling comfortable sharing ideas much earlier in their careers. Staff turnover declined as people discovered a workplace where respect was practiced rather than merely described in employee manuals. Recruiters noticed talented candidates specifically mentioning the company's reputation for inclusion and genuine collaboration. Business success continued, but it no longer stood alone. It was supported by trust that reached every level of the organization. One afternoon, William invited Naomi to his office overlooking the Chicago skyline. He thanked her for everything she had helped build before asking a question that had remained in his mind since the charity gala. After everything that happened that night, why did you never try to embarrass me in return? Naomi looked out across the city before answering with her familiar calm. Because proving someone wrong changes a moment. Helping someone grow can change a lifetime. William lowered his eyes for a moment, quietly reflecting on those words. They carried more wisdom than many leadership books lining the shelves behind his desk. News of the company's remarkable transformation eventually reached universities, nonprofit organizations, and business conferences across the country. Invitations arrived asking William and Naomi to speak together about leadership, communication, and respect across cultures. Whenever they appeared on stage, audiences expected to hear stories about speaking 8 languages. Instead, they heard something much simpler and far more powerful. William openly admitted how quickly assumptions can blind even experienced leaders. Naomi reminded every audience that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity often does not. Together, they demonstrated that lasting change begins when people become curious instead of judgmental. By the end of each event, the applause was never for a billionaire or for a multilingual expert alone. It was for the possibility that every workplace, every community, and every person could become stronger simply by choosing to see human dignity before social status. Nearly 1 year after the unforgettable charity gala, William Carter rarely walked into a meeting without remembering the lesson that had quietly changed his life. The company had continued to expand across international markets, yet the achievement that filled him with the greatest pride could not be measured by quarterly earnings or global rankings. Visitors who entered the headquarters immediately noticed something different. Receptionists greeted every guest in their preferred language whenever possible. New employees attended cultural awareness sessions before learning corporate procedures. Conference rooms displayed maps celebrating the many backgrounds represented within the organization. Hallways that once reflected only business success now reflected human connection. Naomi Brooks never sought recognition for these changes. She preferred spending her mornings mentoring young employees, encouraging interns, and helping new international colleagues feel at home in an unfamiliar country. Whenever someone praised her accomplishments, she redirected the conversation toward the teams that had embraced the company's new values. Her humility quietly inspired others to do the same. One afternoon, a group of college students visited the headquarters as part of a leadership program. They expected to meet famous executives and hear stories about billion-dollar decisions. Instead, William invited them into a training room where Naomi was leading a discussion with employees from 6 different countries. The students watched as participants exchanged personal experiences about growing up in different cultures, overcoming language barriers, and discovering common values despite different traditions. No one interrupted another speaker. Every voice received the same respect. When the discussion ended, one student raised her hand and asked William what had inspired such a dramatic change inside one of the country's most successful companies. William smiled before looking toward Naomi. "The greatest lesson I ever learned did not come from a boardroom," he answered. "It came from realizing how much talent I almost ignored because I was looking at a uniform instead of a person." The room became quietly reflective. Naomi added only one sentence. "Opportunity should never depend on whether someone is noticed first. It should depend on what they are capable of becoming." Those words remained with the students long after they left the building. Weeks later, several universities invited Naomi to speak with graduating seniors preparing to enter the workforce. She encouraged them never to measure themselves solely by their first job, their title, or someone else's expectations. She reminded them that character grows quietly, knowledge continues expanding, and kindness often opens doors that pride can never unlock. The scholarship carried no corporate branding beyond a simple statement engraved beneath its name. Talent deserves opportunity, regardless of where it begins. Naomi initially objected when she learned the scholarship had been inspired by her journey, but William gently explained that it belonged to every young person whose potential might otherwise remain unseen. The first recipients came from diverse backgrounds across the United States, each bringing different languages, traditions, and dreams. During the award ceremony, William stood beside Naomi as they congratulated every student individually. Looking across the room, he realized that the future would belong not to those who spoke the loudest, but to those willing to listen the most carefully. Naomi shared that hope as she watched each scholarship recipient step forward with quiet determination. The applause that filled the auditorium celebrated more than academic achievement. It honored the belief that extraordinary ability can appear in ordinary places, waiting only for someone willing to recognize it with respect instead of assumption, curiosity instead of judgment, and encouragement instead of doubt. 1 year after the evening that had quietly rewritten 2 lives, the Grand Lakeside Hotel once again welcomed hundreds of guests for its annual Children's Charity Gala. The crystal chandeliers shimmered above elegant tables. The string quartet filled the ballroom with familiar melodies, and business leaders, community volunteers, educators, and international partners gathered to celebrate another successful year of giving back. Yet everyone who had attended the previous gala sensed that this evening felt different. The atmosphere carried less pride and more gratitude. As the lights gently dimmed, William Carter stepped onto the stage. There was no dramatic entrance, no celebration of financial achievements, and no presentation highlighting corporate milestones. Instead, he stood silently for a moment, looking across the audience before speaking with calm sincerity. 1 year ago, he began, I believed experience allowed me to recognize talent the moment I saw it. I was wrong. I confused a uniform with a limitation, and I almost overlooked one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. The ballroom became completely still. William smiled toward the front row. Tonight, I would like to introduce someone who taught me that true leadership begins the moment we stop deciding what another person is capable of before they have the chance to show us. Naomi Brooks rose from her seat as warm applause gradually filled the room. She walked toward the stage with the same quiet confidence that had defined her from the beginning. Although her role in life had changed dramatically over the past year, her humility had not. William welcomed her with genuine respect before stepping aside, so the spotlight belonged entirely to her. Naomi looked across the audience and smiled warmly. "Good evening," she said in English. Then she greeted the guests in French. She continued in German, Japanese, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Mandarin, and Arabic. Every greeting carried natural warmth rather than performance. Guests from each represented culture smiled with surprise and appreciation as they heard their own language spoken with authenticity and respect. When she finished, the ballroom erupted into a standing ovation that lasted far longer than anyone expected. Journalists lowered their cameras for a moment simply to applaud. Hotel employees smiled proudly from the back of the room. Several scholarship recipients from the company's newest educational program looked at Naomi with admiration, realizing they were witnessing the kind of leader they hoped to become. When the applause finally settled, Naomi spoke once more. "Languages help me communicate with people," she said gently. "But respect is the language every heart understands. Every person carries a story that cannot be discovered by looking at a job title, a uniform, or a first impression. If we choose curiosity instead of judgment, we give extraordinary people the opportunity to become visible." William quietly nodded beside her, knowing those words reflected the greatest lesson of his own journey. As the evening continued, guests no longer discussed the remarkable number of languages Naomi could speak. Instead, they spoke about kindness, opportunity, humility, and the importance of seeing people before labels. That conversation spread throughout the ballroom, then beyond the hotel, carried by every person who had witnessed the transformation with their own eyes. Long after the music ended and the lights slowly faded, one truth remained brighter than the crystal chandeliers above them. Wealth may open doors, titles may command attention, and success may earn admiration, but character is what changes lives. The woman in the apron had never needed to prove her worth. She simply waited for the moment when grace could speak louder than pride, and when it finally did, it was understood in every language that truly mattered.